This episode is brought to you by MPB. Get cash for the kit you're not using or trade it in for the gear you want at mpb.com. Hey folks, in this episode, we're going to talk about the confluence of photography and long-haul trucking. This is TWiP. Hey, welcome back to another episode of This Week in Photo. I'm your host, Frederick Van Johnson. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Ry Shorosky. He is a photographer who's also a long-haul trucker and a couple of other things that we're going to dive into. Although he doesn't look at, one of the jokes is, people that have a million jobs, I feel like he has a bunch of skills, but at the top of that is photography, as we're going to see by looking at his Instagram profile and all that stuff. Ry, welcome to the show, man. How you doing?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm doing great.
Thanks for pulling over to the side of the road to to do a podcast. Right?
Yeah, you better hurry up. I gotta get back on the road soon.
You got to get back on the road.
No.
That's cool, man. So yeah, it's really interesting. I was telling you before we started recording. This is the first discussion I've had with a photographer that is also a long haul trucker and all that. So I want to start a little bit with your pedigree and how you got started in photography and all that, and then. Of course, I got a million questions about your adventures on the road and all that. So how did you get started in this whole image capturing game?
So pretty much I went to art school in New York back in 2009, 2013, graduated. Always had an interest in wanting to travel out west and just in American culture growing up as a kid. My dad's been a truck driver his whole life. So, been doing that for 35 plus years. And funny enough, it kind of came from, I was at lunch with my parents like 2 weeks before graduating in New York. And we were kind of just talking about plans for after college. And I kind of jokingly said to my dad, knowing that it'd piss him off, that I'm going to go drive a truck. And then something about it kind of just stuck. And then sure enough, there was a month after finishing school in New York, I was on a Greyhound bus out to Missouri to start the whole process of getting my CDL and diving into over-the-road trucking, which I then did for an entire year back in 2014.
Wow. And then the photography side of it. How did the photography side sort of weave into it? Because you're doing it like it seems obvious when I think about it. Like, of course, you're driving across unknown or maybe known areas and seeing amazing sights all the time. Of course, you want to document it and create an Instagram profile and share that with the world. Was that the original drive behind all this? No pun intended.
I wish I could say it was all a master plan and I had it all figured out, but it's been now 5-6 years, and I feel like just recently in the past year, it's kind of come full circle where I realized how it all ties together. So, I think it was 5 years of a little bit of kind of running around like a chicken with his head cut off.
Yeah.
But even on, going back to 2014, that year I spent on the road, when I look back, and I know even in 20 years, 30 years, and I'm older, I'll still look back and feel like that was probably the most important year of my life as a creative, just because I really had no, even growing up with a dad as a trucker, being around, trucking culture to some degree growing up, I had no idea what I was getting into, really diving into that world. And, I left New York with a photo degree and, 4 years of being around the, photo scene in college. And had all these master plans, I think at that time, of I'm going to go out on the road for a year and come back and publish a photo book and, XYZ. And I got out there and within 2 weeks, even a week, I was just full force, 110%, literally living that role and playing that role. And it, got to the point where, I think for a number of reasons, A, honestly, I was intimidated at the time. B, I just, chose to focus on just being the trucker. And so I didn't pick up a camera probably for the first 4 or 5 months of that year, honestly, just because I was so encapsulated in the experience and just with the people I was around, the landscapes I was around. And then I kind of started also this whole process of just learning how to communicate better with people. Because you're just, as a trucker over the road, you're driving 500, 600 miles a day, 7 days a week, living in your truck. And it can be isolating, but you're also stopping pretty frequently at truck stops, rest areas, where you're loading, where you're delivering, just different places. So, you do meet a pretty decent amount of people And especially if you're willing to put yourself out there, you can really have some amazing conversations. So, I mean, I look back, like I said, that's why I said, 20, 30 years, looking back to that year, I feel like it's probably the most important year of my life as a creative, because for me, it kind of gave me that time to focus not on taking pictures, but really kind of laying the foundation for actually being a photographer. And for me, I feel like that step, the first step really relies on how to connect with somebody, regardless if it's someone that has everything in common with you or has nothing in common with you. So I spent that year really just honing my skills in on being able to approach somebody, talk to somebody. And then when it got to the point where I was photographing people, other truck drivers, people I'd meet on the road, even landscapes, I mean, just because of the structure of trucking, I only had maybe 5-10 minutes most times, to get those photos. And then I had to be on my way or they had to be on their way. So it was kind of this really amazing process of learning how to kind of really dial in with people as quick as possible, as opposed to having all the time in the world to just take your time and figure things out.
Yeah, that's really interesting. In a lot of ways, that reminds me of my background a little bit in the military,
Mhm.
and even this podcast. Having to have conversations, or not having to, but the ability to have conversations and build a rapport with people like you and I. We
Yeah.
just met a couple minutes ago, right? And I feel like we can
Yeah.
talk, right? But
Exactly.
being able to do that is a skill, right? And I think like what you're saying echoes like being in the military and being put in situations with other people that you not aren't necessarily forced to get along with them, against your will, but it's
Yeah.
interesting, where are you from? Why? What do you guys do? Of this, having those kinds of conversations, that builds a much more well-rounded human, I think.
Yeah.
Not just photographers, is a well-rounded human versus being insular and like, I've never left my
Mhm.
small town and now I'm going to go out. My only information about other people has been what has been spoon fed to me. Now I'm going to
Yeah.
go out there, versus actually shaking hands and all
Yeah,
that.
100%. Yeah, I mean, even I think for me, I respect everyone's processes. I love learning how other people work, especially as creatives. But I think for me, even early on, I realized, as outgoing as I've trained myself to become, I'm naturally an introvert. I
Hmm.
recharge my energy from inside. So it's like I have to go out and be by myself. But I know, working on projects, being a photographer, getting into filmmaking, directing, working on more collaborative, creative projects, all entails first and foremost connecting and building a relationship with other people. So, for me, even back when I was in my early 20s, graduate, in art school in New York, I already kind of saw that within myself, where I was like, New York City's amazing. You meet some of the most amazing people. Everyone there is just working so hard to be able to stay there and survive there. But I kind of knew for me, like, all right, I need to just, get out and just really get, as many experiences and as many different people kind of under my belt as possible to really kind of train that up. And for me, I think it's coming from a very blue collar, kind of hardworking, living paycheck to paycheck mentality that I grew up in as a kid with my parents. I think it kind of solidified that idea for me as I became an adult, and then realized that, I'm pursuing creativity as a profession, that I kind of have to go out into those places that I connect with most, which just happen to be those blue collar environments. Like, I could just walk into a construction site randomly and start just kind of talking to everybody. And, there I am for 2 hours, just
Hmm.
learning about everybody, joking around. And I think just kind of bringing a little bit of that creative flair to those environments, I think helps people kind of loosen up a little bit and let their guards down. And I've kind of found that it's really, I can hone in on being able to really connect with people in terms of, if I want to ask them to be photographed, or if I even want to just talk to them, learn about experiences, stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah, it makes total sense. I'm curious about where like where's the goal for you personally as a just a human. Are you, because I'm seeing, just in this short time, I'm seeing two halves of a very interesting whole, right? So I'm seeing on
Mhm.
the one half, blue collar trucker, making money, making friends, having these amazing conversations on the road, like this old show I used to watch called BJ and the Bear. I don't know if you remember that, but there's
I don't know.
oh, you got to look it up. It's about this trucker that had a chimpanzee as a co-pilot, and they used to get in
Oh,
these
amazing.
adventures. Yeah, it's really cool, really cool. But there, I see that, and then on the other side, I see this creative, this talented creative, and I have your Instagram profile here. So the guy knows his way around a camera and is taking these striking photos. You know your way around composition. Clearly, you can break the ice with people to get the right shots and all that. So if you had to put a fine point on it, like things aren't even, right? If you had
Yeah.
your druthers, would you be, the non-photographer person, or would it be art related if you had to choose one or the other?
I mean, I feel like that's the question I'm trying to figure out with life, honestly.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
feel like at this point, being 33, I feel like I've bounced back and forth through those worlds enough times now that I realize that it's just never, it's never a linear path for me. It's not ever going to get to a point where I'm just 100% the creative or 100%, the trucker or whatever life I choose to dive into. I think, I'm realizing for me, and I think for a lot of people, I mean, I think that's kind of one of the secret sauces to the ingredients of a successful life, if you want to put it, is living all of these different experiences, and you kind of start to see how they complement each other in just the
Hmm.
strangest of ways. So, for me, my secret sauce is just this creativity combined with that, going out with these blue collar environments, and just happens for me, it's trucking. So it's one of those things where, right now I'm not trucking, I'm not on the road, but in 6 months and 5 months I could go back out. It's kind of always there in me. So I think in that sense, if I had to choose one over the other, I don't honestly know if I could.
Yeah,
Or I feel
yeah,
like I know I'd be lying to somebody if I told them, oh, my goal is to just be, the 100% creative. And even if I got to a point where I was, successful, comfortable, happy, safe and secure, had 10 million in the bank and could just hang out for the rest of my life, I know there'd still be a part that wants to go jump back in the truck and suffer a little bit, just to
yeah.
kind of see where it takes me.
Yeah, because why not? But then with 10 million in the bank, you might be the owner of the trucking company at that point, and have a
Yeah, for
fleet.
real.
And you just every now and then the big owner wants to get his hands dirty and get in the truck, right?
I know, definitely.
Yeah, no, that's really cool, man. So yeah, I'm really curious about what that world looks like on the road. I mean, we all, if you're an adult listening to this or watching this, you have been on the roads driving around and you've seen trucks around it. I always wonder what that world looks like, and what a day in the life looks like out there. Is it like you said, you could be loading or unloading and all that, but from a
Hmm.
wake up in the morning to a go to bed at night, kind of segment for you. Describe what that is and what that looks like.
I mean, it's really like it's all over the place. It's every day is different, which keeps it fun, keeps it exciting, keeps it fresh. But I mean, I always describe to people trucking every single day is like literally living through every human emotion possible, and
Yeah.
then you go to bed and reset and start over the next day, and you prepare yourself for that whole spectrum to go through. So, in terms of how a day looks, you're usually up at 5, 6, 7 o'clock if you're not driving late the night before. And your goal is to drive that 500, 600, even 700 miles in that day. And so you're, for the most part, if you're working for yourself or a smaller company, you're really your own boss in that sense. So no one's telling you or micromanaging you. So it's a lot of responsibility when you're in charge of an 80,000 pound vehicle, with a
Yeah.
truck that's loaded with whatever you're hauling, to get it safely to the place it needs to go. And so it's this whole balance. It's almost like a dance, where you have to keep yourself composed. There's moments where you do have to step up and kind of really have that confidence to get through certain moments or experiences. Um, but I mean, you're up, you just literally, for me, a normal morning would literally be getting up and, I would usually sleep on the side of the highway or a rest area somewhere where it's quiet, just
Mhm.
because truck stops tend to be, a little obviously loud. Um, and I just never preferred, squeezing in between two other trucks and then,
Mhm.
being stressed out about somebody ripping my bumper off or this or that.
Yep.
So I mean, I'd be fortunate to wake up on, some highway, whether it's in the middle of the desert in Arizona or, I don't know, Michigan, Maine, just literally anywhere you wake up. And I mean, I kind of had it dialed in where I would do my little like, shower on the side of the road, just with like a water bottle, my water jug that I had and a towel, get
Mhm.
myself freshened up, do my little workout routine, my push-ups, my sit-ups. I have my little free weights in the truck, kind of just get myself going. And then it's literally just hit the road and go. You stop for fuel when you need to, you stop for, you try and eat meals when you can, but otherwise, I mean, it's just literally this go, go, go mentality.
That's crazy. And what are you doing to keep your mind busy while you're driving these 500, 700 miles? Is it, books, Audible, just music? Is it podcasts? Like what am I hearing inside the cab?
Of really everything. I mean, I feel like I've been fortunate where I grew up just listening to all different kinds of music from friends, family. So, I mean, I would just go through my encyclopedia of music, listening to anything from classical to death metal to, Southern rap. I mean, really just all across the board. There'd be times where, listen to audiobooks, a lot of podcasts, just really, whatever feels like it's going to excite you in that moment. Um, and then honestly, there'd be times where I was just tired of all that stuff and just would literally just drive with the windows open and just in complete quiet. But
Yeah.
I mean, in that sense where you have that much time on your hands and you're doing a job, it's kind of unique in that sense, because you think of most of their jobs, it's like you're pretty busy. It's like if you're working in a job 9 to 5, or even if you're working for yourself, your mind is pretty much, constantly going about doing that job. With trucking, it's doing that, but then all of a sudden you do have these 5 hour, 6 hour stretches where, you're fortunate enough to be on the interstate. You have cruise control on, no cars are pestering you. So you're just driving. And those are the kind of the moments where, yeah, you do dive into whether it's music, podcasts, audiobooks, or even, I mean, for me, I kind of found a lot of times I end up back out on the road when I kind of need a reset, inside.
Hmm.
And so a lot of that time will be literally just like this sort of a self-reflection, sort of a meditation, which I think everyone can relate to, because, most people have been out on a road trip, whether it's even just driving across their home state or across the country. And there is that sort of trance that you get into on the road when you're driving long distances, and trucking, it's like that, but on steroids. So, I mean,
Yeah.
the term I kind of came up with, and I feel like I always use, is it's sort of this blue collar Zen mentality, um, that I think is applicable to say something like, being in the military, where you take this environment that isn't normally thought of as this very like peaceful, tranquil, get into a trance sort of state of mind environment. But then all of a sudden you do kind of find ways to do that because you sort of have to out of necessity. With trucking, there's a constant stress of someone's going to cut you off. The straps might break on the load. You're not sure what's going on with the truck. You're not sure if it's going to be snowing in an hour, or if you're going to be stuck in a blizzard. So in that sense that, you kind of have to learn how to find the balance of channeling all of those high stresses out, but also still being aware of them. And I think,
Yeah.
that's what ties into that sense of that blue collar Zen mentality, where you do get into this trance where you kind of just are doing the job, but you're also kind of aware of your environment at all times.
Yeah, yeah, I find the same thing. Like when I get out there and I'm driving, just around, especially if it's like an hour long trip or something, I get
Mm-hmm.
some of my best thinking done on those trips. Right? It's
Yep.
just like you said, that whatever that trance you fall into, where your brain is thinking and your body's on autopilot and doing all the rules
Mm-hmm.
of the road stuff, and your brain is somewhere else. It's a weird kind of disconnect. Um, but on that, how do you feel? This is completely off the topic of photography. So, but you're on the road out there, and there's these. What was it? Tesla is, I think, the first one to say that they're building these self-driving trucks that are going to be on
Mm-hmm.
the road in a couple of years, and
Yeah, hopefully.
yeah, yeah, that should supposedly make things easier. They're still gonna have to have a human in
Mm-hmm.
there, but
Yep.
it's gonna make things easier. How do you feel about that whole movement towards self-driving long haul trucking?
I honestly kind of love it. I think that's surprising for people who ask me that, because it is a pretty common question that, I'm
Mm,
asked or comes up in conversation. But I think just from being involved firsthand in the trucking industry for 5, 6 years now, and even seeing my dad navigating it, since I was a kid, it's one of these things where it's hard to really kind of figure out where it comes from. But trucking is sort of, in my opinion, 10, 20 years behind everything else. I think
mm,
just because it is constantly moving so fast. And trucking, there's no company out there that can say, hey, let's take a day off from trucking and figure out how we can do things better. It's everything is so, the margins are so slim for profit in trucking, that it's just constantly this, you have to go, 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 go. And that 1 minute that you even take to stay on the side of the road is ultimately losing money.
yeah.
So I think in this way, as you see, the cost of goods go up, especially post COVID, something like, you see how lumber and building materials have just gone, skyrocketed. You see inflation, you see, shipping costs going up, all of these things, these rates go up. But at the end of the day, the rates for truck driving don't necessarily equate the same. Um, so, I mean, tying that back to something like EV commercial vehicles, I think it's ultimately going to be a really good thing for the industry, because I think it's going to kind of give that, it's going to give the people a little bit of a kick in the ass, honestly, to really reevaluate how things are being done. And honestly, I think it brings attention to trucking.
Yeah.
Trucking is sort of this weird paradox where, it really is the backbone of the country. Every single thing we're around, the chair you're sitting in right now, the computer we're talking on, everything, the clothes we're wearing, the food we're eating, it's all transported on a truck at one point in time.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if trucks just decided to go on strike tomorrow and stop driving, I mean, supermarkets would be empty, sort of a little bit of what we saw during COVID.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um, so in that sense, it's really fascinating that, that necessity is such an important part of this country, but at the same time, truck driving, the industry sort of goes overlooked, or it's not really ever in the conversations. You saw a little bit of it where there was a few weeks during COVID where there was like trucker appreciation happening, and there was some articles being written about the importance of truck driving, and that was really amazing to see. But otherwise, I think it's just one of those things that does go overlooked a lot of times, or set aside. So I think with technology kind of coming up now and trying to incorporate driverless trucking, I think it's something that's ultimately going to be good for the industry, because it really is going to bring attention to not only the industry but also the people that are in it, and helping those people stay healthy, giving them a fair cost of for living. Because I mean, trucking, it's most people, even if you're doing it 9 to 5, it's a pretty grueling job and profession. You're not sitting in an office. Most of your the elements around you are not finite. It's like you're doing a job where it's dictated by how people drive, how the weather is, and all of those things are very unpredictable. So, in my eyes, most drivers I meet, even the most hardest working ones, I feel like they should be making twice as much money as they're actually making.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Interesting. I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about gear.
Hmm.
And I know you are affiliated a little bit with the folks over at MPB, who are a
Hmm.
sponsor of this podcast. Tell me about your what you're doing with MPB and the gear that you're using, that MPV that came from the MPB engine. How does all that stuff work?
Yeah. Yeah. So they had reached out to me, and were gracious enough to basically ask if I wanted to be a part of Photoville, which is a photo exhibition in New York every fall. That kind of emphasizes the outdoor experience of art, as opposed to going inside to different galleries. So they kind of do it. I think it's throughout all 5 boroughs, if I'm correct.
Hmm.
So they invited me to do that, and were kind enough to send me out some gear to make some new work for that project. So it's always fun for me, because it's like, I honestly, when I'm on the road, a lot of times I'm using my iPhone. I'll literally edit photos, videos on my iPhone,
Yeah.
and that's how a lot of my content on Instagram is from my phone. So it's always fun for me to dive back in and trying new equipment, because I get asked that question a lot of, oh, what gear do you use, what editing software do you use? And it's always funny to tell people, like, for me, I think just because my mind has 12 different things going on at the same time, I kind of just tend to try and simplify that process. So there's a lot of times where just using an iPhone is the best solution for me.
Yep.
So when all of a sudden MPB sends me a brand new Sony mirrorless camera and a couple lenses, all of a sudden I feel like I'm like a 12-year-old kid again, where I'm running around with a digital camera, having a lot of fun.
Yeah, what was that like though? That's interesting, because I'm kind of moving in the opposite direction, because I'm shooting with mirrorless and Panasonic and
Hmm.
those sorts of, I guess, quote, proper cameras to, I
Yeah.
guess you'd say that here in 2021, right? That's kind of in that transition. But you moving from the larger gear to the smaller gear, and having
Hmm.
that flexibility, and then realizing the power of like the phone and all that stuff is really exciting. And of course using larger gear for projects that need that. But
Yeah.
if I'm just walking around and I don't have my kit with me, and I have my phone with me, I can still get something that looks really, really good. So
Oh,
I'm,
definitely.
I'm
Yeah.
interested going in the other direction, where you've kind of been marinating in the small camera flexibility world, and then moving to a Sony mirrorless camera and all the power that gives you. Has it been a jarring move, or has it been a revelatory move? Like, holy crap, I need to be shooting this all the time, or how do you feel about it?
It's kind of somewhere in the middle. I mean, I think for me, I've realized over the years that, the gear you use and the setup is kind of just subjective to whatever the environment is, whatever feels
Yeah.
comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
I think I can think back when I was in college, and, I learned photography through shooting film at first. So I, would spend pretty much every night in college in the dark room, in the black and white dark room, color dark room, doing color processing. And so I came from that sort of like almost like a purist mentality where even back then I was like, oh, I didn't want to shoot digital. I never even thought about using an iPhone at that point to make most of my work. It was always like, okay, I'm shooting medium format film. I'm even shooting 8x10 sheet film. I'm going to maintain this purist mentality. And as much as I still love those processes and, I'd love to bust out an 8x10 camera every now and then. I also think it's just really subjective to that moment, where you're at, the environment, your state of mind, what's going to work best for you as the creative. And like I said, for me, I found, unless, working on something very specifically, whether it's a commission project or a personal project that I have very well planned out, that's where different gear might come into play, where, I decide, okay, I'm going to shoot this with, a Sony A9, or I want to shoot this project with medium format film. But I think just, being in the moment and being able to have something like an iPhone is a really amazing tool, because it really kind of levels the playing fields for people wanting to create content, whether it's photos, videos, any of that stuff. And I think for me, I've always been really against that idea of like an elitist mentality that, to be a photographer, to be a filmmaker, you have to have this secret talent that other people don't have. And, honestly, I kind of hate that idea. I think it's amazing that somebody, say like a trucker, can all of a sudden have some free time, decide to start taking photos with their iPhone. And then they end up taking, these amazing pictures that go deeper and deeper and deeper. And, I've been fortunate where I've met people like that on the road that take up something like photography just from having an iPhone or an iPad. And then all of a sudden, those are the people that I'm most excited to follow on Instagram, because I see their photos come up and I'm like, holy crap, this is amazing to see this progress, this evolution of somebody that's literally, diving into that creative process of learning about themselves and their environment.
Yeah, I love it. I couldn't agree with you more. Yeah, it's what I like to say on the podcast a lot is we as photographers or creatives tend to, I guess maybe just humans, tend to fall into the trap of the or, right? Well, I'm an iPhone photographer, therefore I can only shoot iPhone, or I'm a Sony photographer and, everything else is crap. So, and I shoot with this and everything you shoot with is it was a bad decision, where the reality is it is fluid. And depending on the situation, like some situations, pulling out that big Sony with a big proper proper lens on it may not be the right thing to do when you're on the road, right? Alone,
you may 100%.
You may not want to whip out that $3,000 worth of gear where you're just another dude with a phone. You could get into situations that other gear would cause some sort of, blockage. So yeah, it could be an and versus an or, I think.
Yeah. I mean, even going back to, talking about that first year on the road for me in 2014 and just learning really how to communicate and connect with people as a creative and as a photographer, the kinds of gear you choose to approach somebody that's a complete stranger with really does play a large role in whether or not they're going to trust you, interact with you, feel comfortable being photographed or documented in any way. I mean, that's something that you really have to kind of feel out in the moment, so there's been times where, I remember back on the road, and even still now, if I'm working on stuff on the road and meeting new people, I really kind of feel out what their level of confidence is, their level of comfort. Some people that are more low key, like the idea of just like me approaching them with an iPhone and just saying, hey, I'm a photographer. I'd love to just kind of take some photos on the side. And, I can kind of see where that kind of loosens them up a little bit because there's not all this pressure on them. And then there's also people on the other side where, you have the whole camera set up and you have the flash on, and it just, it looks like what you're doing, from the outside. And some people feed off of that. Some people love in the sense of the attention. Okay, this guy knows, or this girl knows what they're doing. So, they have the gear. So I think it's really just sort of that, it's like a real-time dance or a play where you have to really kind of navigate with somebody to see what makes them feel most comfortable. So, that kind of, for me, ties back in that idea that, to me, the kind of equipment, the gear I'm using to shoot with is really subjective, totally on the experience.
Yeah. I think we're getting more and more closer to that, where it's going to be completely subjective as these phones and mobile devices get better and better. I mean, we're in 2021 and that, just on the iPhone side, the iPhone 13 is ridiculous.
Oh yeah.
Who knows what 2025, assuming the planet makes it to 2025, but who knows what 2025 will bring, right? Because we're already kind
Hmm.
of like, what was that taken with a proper camera or an iPhone?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's really interesting, and it comes down to just the hopefully what it will come down to is just the creative vision of the person,
Hmm.
and what you use to capture that will be relegated to the old people that used to talk about cameras and lenses and all that stuff all the time, and now it's all about the story and the art that you
Hmm.
created, and the gear that you use to capture it with is
Yep.
kind of an afterthought. I think that's the hopefully
Definitely.
we'll get there. One a couple of further questions on this. Then this is just a curiosity question that I'm
Hmm.
going to think about in about an hour as I'm driving around outside. How do you guys communicate on trucks? In the olden days, it was CB radio and
Hmm.
handles and 10-4 goodbye, all that stuff.
Yeah.
We're in 2021 now. What does that look like? Is it still CB? Are you guys texting? What how do you
So
talk to other truckers?
it's kind of a combination of all those things now. I mean, I love all the old school super trucker culture within trucking. So I mean, one of the first things I did when I got my own truck was get a really nice CB radio.
Mm-hmm.
To be able to just like listen to conversations, be able to talk to their people. And so that is still that's CB culture is still a thing in trucking. It's sort of becoming less and less now as technology exists, because it's a lot easier and quicker, honestly, to just jump on your phone and look up, what the weather's going to be like an hour down the road, or to see traffic updates of if there's accidents going through some metropolitan area.
Yeah.
But I mean, there are times where you might not have service on the road because you're in the middle of Montana or somewhere, or it happens in real time where, there's a real time accident a couple miles ahead that hasn't hit Google Maps yet. So you don't even have any idea. And those, having a CB radio in those moments is really crucial because, people do jump on and say, kind of give you a heads up of what's going on. And it's just like, it's fun to just talk to people. So, I mean, I loved having my CB radio in the truck, I'd always be
Yeah.
on there every single day, just talking to people. Um, and yeah, like, I mean, having handles is still a thing. It's kind
What's
of this
your what's your
rite
handle?
of
Do you have a
passage.
handle?
So yeah, so it's funny. So I don't know if you can see, but so I have it on my knuckles actually. So it's actually, which is
Loverboy,
always, yeah,
nice.
which is always
That's
like
awesome.
a, yeah, which is always like a fun conversation starter. But yeah, so that was like my CB handle. So people knew me on the CB that I knew as Loverboy, but that comes from basically when I first started driving in 2014, when I was working for a large company. The first 3 months of that I spent basically living in another guy's truck, and he was my trainer. So he was the one who really taught me all the ways of trucking.
Hmm.
And I was fortunate where, you don't know who you're going to get paired up with. You're literally thrown into a truck with a complete stranger. And so, that dynamic obviously can go south very quickly if just two
Hmm.
personalities clash. And I've heard horror stories, of every possible situation, and but I was fortunate where I met, guy in his 50s, Kansas farmer, divorced 5 times, and him and I just hit it off, and he, kind of became sort of like a second dad to me.
That's great.
And so we worked together. We actually stayed on the truck together for an extra month after, I had graduated to my own truck at that time, just because him and I had such a synergy going and working together. But anyway, him and I would, just really soak in the experiences. And when you're team driving like that, it's pretty much 12 hours per person. So, I would say wake up while he's driving at 8 o'clock, and by 8:30, 9 o'clock, I take over, and then I drive throughout the whole day, and then come 8, 9 o'clock at night, we switch over to have dinner together, and then he'd switch over to driving, and I'd go to bed in the back in the sleeper. So, you're living together in incredibly tight quarters. So it's like,
Hmm.
you really get to know somebody in that sense. But him and I would just, every night, every day have these conversations. I'd always ask him about, being married and, being divorced and just, life experiences. And funny enough, at the time, I remember I was reading Larry McMurtry a lot,
Hmm.
um, who I don't know if people are, if they're not familiar with him. He's an American author who wrote Lonesome Dove, just all these like very Americana, Texas sort of culture based stories about
Hmm.
relationships and kind of adolescence coming up in the Midwest. So I was just very much, thinking about relationships and love, and just talking to him and asking him all these questions at the time. And just, one night he was just like, you don't ever stop talking about, love. You're kind of like a lover boy. And it just stuck. So when I got my own truck a few months later, he got me a patch for one of my jumpsuits that said Loverboy. And then a couple of years ago, I was like, you know what? I think I'm gonna get it tattooed on me. So I got it on my
That's
knuckles.
awesome. What a great story, man. That is awesome. This is fascinating. I'm learning a lot. You're making me want to like go investigate becoming a long haul trucker. Like
I
I could do
mean,
that. Get out of the
it's
house.
fun. I recommend it to everybody, man. It's a humbling experience.
Yeah, yeah, that is so cool. So what are you shooting with right now? What's like besides the iPhone? Like what is
Mm.
the you mentioned the Sony body. What kind of kit do you have around that?
Yeah, so right now it's the iPhone that I kind of always have on me, obviously, as a phone. I
Yep.
love shooting with that, but the Sony A9, and then it's funny. I used to always, I think just because I love such framing and composition, I'm having a lot of fun now with shooting wide angle, like 16 millimeter, even fisheye kind of style.
Yeah.
Just kind of loosening up a little bit, and that's also one of the reasons why I love shooting the iPhone is because they have the wide angle feature.
Hmm.
So I've now got my 16 to 35 lens for the Sony and then a 24 to 70. But like I said, honestly, I keep it pretty simple, just because that's what works for me. When I get a little too overcomplicated with gear, I kind of get overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Um, so honestly, it's just for me, it's just having a camera body, a lens or two. I have a flashpoint flash, which is basically like a portable strobe flash, which, is one of the best things I've ever invested in. um, which literally just looks like a big, it looks like a big strobe light on a like it has a hot shoe attachment that goes straight onto the camera.
Hmm.
And I love using that thing because I mean you can power literally in the pitch black and and get great pictures. So that's just kind of my camera gear in my bag. I have a small bag and just kind of carry it around.
Yeah. You know what? If I would if I had the ability, I'm in Northern California where we have a fair amount of light pollution. I can imagine you're
Mhm.
traveling across the country in some areas that have very little light pollution.
Yeah.
That's an opportunity for some astrophotography and get some shots of the Milky Way, even with the iPhone, right?
Oh,
That
definitely. Yeah.
yeah, some long exposures out there. That would be ridiculous with the truck in there. That'd be crazy,
I
you
know.
know?
Yeah, I definitely. I mean, that's kind of like that was. I would literally almost every single night be taking exposures of my truck wherever it was parked. That kind of became like a little practice of mine, like to
Yeah.
the point where I'd have some 15, 16 hour day and just be absolutely drained where I wouldn't even want to get out of the truck to stretch. I want to just like just literally hop right in the back in bed and just pass out. But I would like got to the point where I was like, I can't do that. I got to get out and do my exposure of the truck for the night.
Yeah, that's so cool. See, and having a goal and some kind of anchor right there that drives you to do it. Where if it's like if you didn't have that, okay, I need to do a shot of the truck. I'm gonna put it on Instagram, and as part of my
Mm.
my daily routine, then you
Yeah.
would just blow it off. You're like, there's nothing.
Yeah.
Right.
No,
I'm in a
man.
truck stop. There's nothing here. I'm just gonna go to bed. Right.
Definitely. I think that kind of ties back to that whole idea. Just for me, I think in a weird way, I think discipline is so important as a creative in that sense,
Hmm.
which don't always go hand in hand in the obvious sense, because it's like, yeah, you want to just kind of be free and loose and in the moment. But I think that idea of, to be more and more disciplined as, buttoned up as it could be, as regimented as it could be, which doesn't work for everybody. But for me,
Yeah.
that's kind of what I find really helps me thrive, in terms of, yeah, just staying on top of myself to make more and more content.
Yeah. Love it, man. Well, cool. Well, thanks for coming on, Ryan. I appreciate you,
Yeah. Thank you
sharing a
so much for having me.
glimpse. No, yeah, anytime. We got to do this again for sure. But a glimpse into the world of the stuff that you're doing, and it's fascinating. And I'm a little jealous because I'm in this little. Here's my truck. This is my truck right here. So I get to sit here.
I love it.
What's next for you? What does the future look like? Either both in the immediate future, like within the last part of 2021, and where would
Mhm.
you like to be? Where do you see Rye in say 2025? What does that look like?
I mean, I've definitely got some master plans in the works for sure.
Yeah.
I think I've been fortunate to finally hit that point where, trucking and creativity have kind of come full circle for me. So, now it's about really pushing myself to that next level. I'm spending more and more time in filmmaking and directing. I'm actually working on writing a script for what I envision to be either a feature or a mini series, that's kind of loosely adapted and based on all my time on the road trucking over the past 6, 7 years. Um, I'm actually working on right now, which I'm actually really, really excited about because I honestly have felt a little bit stale about my work personally for the past few months. And I'm actually working on my first NFT drop. So I'm kind
Nice.
of Yeah, which is really exciting. So that's something that, I was looking into a few months ago and felt intimidated because I just didn't know the space well enough. I didn't have the confidence there. Unfortunately, just met the right people and, kind of built up a little team behind me. So, we're working on that right now. That's going to drop hopefully in a month or so, which, then gives the incentive to be working on a little bit of a clothing line that's going to be added into that NFT drop. And all this stuff is really themed around truck driving, rodeo, Western kind of vibe. So I'm having a lot of fun
Perfect.
doing more and more graphic design, designing shirts, doing all this fun stuff, like coming up with fictitious, Western cowboy store names and coming up with the labels for the shirts and everything. So, I mean, for me right now, it's really taking all of these experiences that I've had over the past 5, 6 years, whether it's trucking, rodeo, photography, and now kind of taking all that stuff to the next level, taking on more responsibility and just kind of seeing how far I can expand my creative branch.
Yeah, no, that's great because then it all dovetails together, right? And as you were talking
Yep.
through that, I'm thinking like, man, this guy has you have all the raw materials right now for a book, right? You got the stories, you've got you're articulate to put the words on paper. It sounds like
Mhm.
you've got the illustrations, so you just
Yeah,
got to
it's
weave it
not
together,
one.
right?
I gotta say, one of the things I'm most excited about, which isn't a definite, but I'm kind of in the pre-production talks right now of trying to do a children's book that's loosely, it's kind of based on being on the road as a trucker.
Oh,
So that's
cool.
something that I'm super excited about. I don't know if it'll maybe be a book or even an animated short series that would live on YouTube or something, but I think something like that, it really gets me fired up because I always try and focus and maintain that childlike mentality of just being in awe and being in wonder of everything, and as put together and as adult like as I can try to pretend to be. At heart, I'm gonna always just kind of be a 10-year-old running around being fascinated by sunsets and people and everything I come across. So to do like a children's book or an animated series geared towards children is definitely something I'm really excited about.
Do it. Do it. And you know what else? You know what else you got to do? You have to check out that. You got to find it. I don't know where it is online, but you got to check out that
Mhm.
show, BJ and the Bear. It was.
I will. I
You have
absolutely
to
will.
find it. You're gonna if you find it, you're gonna thank me. You're gonna email me and say, Frederick, this is me, man. This is me. It's gonna make you want to
Probably,
put
yeah.
a. It's gonna make you want to go get a chimpanzee and put it
Oh my god. I
at
don't
your
know, man. You
coat.
never know. Yeah, I'm full of surprises, so it could happen.
That's cool. So leave us with this, right? Leave us with one story from the road that sticks out in your mind, whether it's some crazy person that kept following you, or some perilous situation you found yourself in, or some unexpected goodness that popped up. Yeah, there's got to be a story in your mind that pops out, like that time I was driving through Michigan, this thing happened. Like, what's your story?
Okay, I'll. The first one that came to mind is I was actually talking to somebody yesterday about it, so in the story. But last year, when I was on the road during 2020, it was like February, I think, and I was driving I-80 in Wyoming, and I-80 is notorious for blizzards, wind in the wintertime, so it shut down a lot. And it literally, within 20, 30 minutes, blizzard started coming down, whiteout conditions. I was able to get off the interstate just in time before they shut it down. So I wasn't stranded, but I ended up at this mom and pop truck stop. Um, and I mean, it was just literally just total whiteout conditions. So there's nobody outside. It's middle of Wyoming, nowhere. And there just happens to be a steakhouse open next door. And so I go to the steakhouse. There's nobody in there. So I end up eating, this $50 steak dinner with like 8 waiters and waitresses kind of just watching me in this kind of log cabin fire sort of environment, which I felt like straight out of The Shining. So
Oh,
I enjoy that. I go back to my truck, I hang out, and I go into the truck stop. And I love, always looking for, like, I love clothes, I love fashion and stuff like that. So when I'm on the road, I'm always looking for, the cool sort of like vernacular trucking slash road, shirts and hoodies and stuff that they sell at truck stops.
yep.
And I'd come across this pink Wyoming cowboy hoodie, and I was just like, oh my god, I gotta buy this. And I got distracted and forgot about it and went back to my truck. And I was like, all right, I'll just go back, when the truck stop opens back up in the morning and grab it. And I just couldn't stop thinking about it the whole night, while I was going to sleep. So I end up, I eventually fall asleep, and I wake up at like 3, 4 o'clock in the morning to the smell of smoke And I actually used to live in Northern California for a little bit when in some of those bad fires. So I feel
Yep.
like that smell of wildfire smoke is sort of almost like a trigger for me at this point.
Hmm.
But anyway, I smell the smoke and I immediately wake up and I look, at the side view of my truck and I just see, 15 police cars, fire trucks, everything. So here I am, in my hoodie, sweatpants. I throw my cowboy boots on, jump out. It's still snowing out. It's like, 10 below. It's Wyoming, February. And I look and the truck stops on fire. I mean, there's like, 20-foot flames and there's firefighters out there in the 10 below weather, literally trying to put a fire out. And so I was just like, holy shit, this is crazy. So I end up, me being me, I, grab my phone, grab my camera, end up hanging out with the firefighters for an hour or two at like 4 a.m, talking to them about everything. They end up putting the fire out. But I mean, the moral of the story is that I didn't get the hoodie. It burned with the, with the truck stop.
But you got the photos.
And I did get the photos, yeah. And then, I mean, I guess the actual moral of the story is that then a week or two later, I ended up seeing that same hoodie somewhere else. So I was able to buy it.
There you
So
go.
it worked out.
There you
But
go.
I guess that moral of the story is if you find something like that, like a gem, buy it immediately because you never know if it's going to burn down in a fire that night.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like I'm talking to the world's most interesting man right now. I'm telling you.
I mean, I feel like that's a pretty like vanilla story. I feel like I could really dive in. Yeah.
I bet. Yeah, offline over beers, we'll have a conversation. You're like, oh, dude, let me
definitely.
tell you.
Yeah. I could tell you some tales.
Here's a cliffhanger that we'll leave because you got to come on again. So you got to commit to coming on TWiP again because there's so much to explore here. But here's a cliffhanger for next time. I'm gonna have to have you go into the meaning behind the bees, like because I think you mentioned that you are moving into beekeeping as one of your exploits here, right? So
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, I mean, I guess the cliffhanger there is back last year in 2020, I started hauling bees across the country for a period of time. So I was hauling, millions of bees, taking them from huge farms in Central California to pollinate almonds and whatnot and taking them back to their home in Florida. But I mean, yeah, that's a whole crazy world that I was able to dive into and really meet some amazing people that are just, living the life as beekeepers in these really rural areas and, doing it right.
That's fantastic, man. Ryan, thank you for coming on. Pleasure having you. You will come on again. And by the time you come on again, you'll have made more adventures, I'm sure, and more creative things. So yeah, so
Definitely.
Look out for an invite in the next month or so. I have you back on the show and talk about what's going on. I appreciate you, man. And good luck on the road. Stay safe out there. And yeah, congratulations on Photoville with MPB and all that. And yeah, keep crushing it.
Definitely. You got it.
This is TWiP. This episode was sponsored by MPB, the world's largest online platform for used photo and video kit. Visit mpb.com.